Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you handed them the keys to your entire soul, only to watch them try to destroy you with those very keys? I'm talking about the kind of trust that makes you vulnerable in ways you never thought possible. The kind that strips away every defense mechanism you've built over the years and leaves you standing there, completely exposed, believing that this person, this one human being out of billions, would never hurt you. Well, let me tell you something that still sends chills down my spine every single time I think about it. 3 days before what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the man I loved, the man I had built an entire future with in my mind, looked me straight in the eyes and told me he was canceling our wedding. But here's the thing that makes this story different from every other heartbreak tale you've heard. He didn't cancel it because he fell out of love. He didn't cancel it because he found someone else. He didn't even cancel it because he got cold feet. No, he canceled our wedding as part of a calculated, methodical plan to break me down completely, to crush my spirit so thoroughly that I would become dependent on him, malleable, controllable. This is my story, and I'm sharing it because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear this. Someone needs to know that even when you're in the darkest pit of despair, even when you feel like the person you loved has successfully destroyed every piece of who you are, you can fight back. You can save yourself. And I did exactly that. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what matters is that I lived to tell it. And that's why I'm here on I Lived to Tell, because my survival wasn't guaranteed. And my victory over the trap he set for me wasn't easy, but it was absolutely worth fighting for. Let me take you back to the beginning, not to the cancellation, but to the very first time I met Marcus. That wasn't his real name, but I'm protecting his identity not for his sake, but because I refuse to give him any more power in my narrative than he's already had. I was 28 years old, working as a marketing consultant for a mid-sized firm in Seattle, living my best life, as they say. I had friends, hobbies, a decent apartment with a view of the Space Needle on clear days, and I was genuinely happy with my independence. I had dated before, had a few relationships that didn't work out, but nothing that devastated me. I was at that point in my life where I knew who I was, what I wanted, and I wasn't willing to settle for anything less than genuine connection and mutual respect. Then Marcus walked into my life at a mutual friend's birthday party, and everything I thought I knew about love got turned upside down. He was charming in a way that didn't feel forced, funny without trying too hard, intelligent without being condescending, and attractive in that casual, effortless way that made you do a double take. We talked for hours that night, standing in the corner of that crowded apartment while music pulsed around us and people laughed and danced, but it felt like we were in our own bubble, our own world where nothing else mattered except the words flowing between us. He asked questions about my life that went deeper than surface-level small talk. He remembered details I mentioned in passing, and he shared stories about his own experiences that made me feel like I was getting to know someone real, someone authentic, someone who understood the complexities of being human in this chaotic world. The early months of our relationship felt like something out of a romance novel, and I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, I had found that person everyone talks about, the one who makes you believe in soulmates and destiny and all those concepts you'd previously been cynical about. Marcus would show up at my office with my favorite coffee. He'd leave little notes in my purse that I'd discover during meetings, making me smile at the most unexpected moments. He introduced me to his family within the first 2 months, which felt significant because his mother was warm and welcoming, his father was reserved but kind, and his younger sister became one of my closest friends. We traveled together, taking weekend trips to Portland and Vancouver, exploring new cities hand in hand, taking those cliché tourist photos that I now can't look at without feeling physically ill. He integrated himself into every aspect of my life with such skill that I didn't even notice it happening. My friends became our friends. My routines became our routines. My dreams became our dreams. When he proposed after 18 months of dating on a beach in Maui during sunset with waves crashing behind us and tears streaming down my face, I said yes without a single hesitation because I believed, with every fiber of my being, that I was saying yes to forever with someone who loved me as much as I loved him. But here's what I've learned about manipulation. The most dangerous kind doesn't announce itself with red flags and warning sirens. The most dangerous kind wraps itself in love and affection and grand gestures, so that by the time you realize what's happening, you're already caught in a web so intricate that escaping feels impossible. Looking back now with the clarity that only distance and healing can provide, I can see the signs I missed, the little moments that should have made me pause, should have made me question, should have made me run. Like the way he would subtly criticize my friends, nothing overt or aggressive, Just small comments here and there about how Sarah was too dramatic, how Jennifer was a bad influence, how my coworker Tom was clearly interested in me and I should maintain professional distance. At the time, I thought he was just being protective, maybe a little jealous in that flattering way that made me feel desired and important. I didn't see it for what it really was. Isolation tactics, carefully designed to cut me off from my support system bit by bit until he became my entire world. Or the way he would offer to help with things, and then get frustrated when I didn't do them exactly his way, whether it was organizing my closet, or planning our weekend activities, or choosing what to order at restaurants. He had opinions about everything, from how I wore my hair to what time I should go to bed, and he presented these opinions as caring suggestions from someone who just wanted the best for me. The wedding planning process is when things started to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. Though I tried desperately to convince myself that the stress was normal, that every couple goes through rough patches, that the pressure of planning a big event was just bringing out the worst in both of us temporarily. Marcus insisted on being involved in every single decision, which initially seemed sweet and engaged, but quickly became suffocating. He had veto power over everything: my dress, the venue, the guest list, the flowers, the music, even my choice of bridesmaids. When I suggested my best friend since childhood, Rebecca, as maid of honor, he told me that he'd never felt comfortable around her, that she'd made inappropriate comments about him at a party months ago, that having her stand beside me on our wedding day would make him feel disrespected and uncomfortable. I agonized over that conversation for weeks, caught between loyalty to my oldest friend and loyalty to my future husband, and eventually I made the choice that I still regret to this day. I asked Rebecca to step down, fabricating some excuse about wanting to honor a family member instead, lying to one of the people who knew me best to please a man who was systematically dismantling my sense of self. The look of hurt in Rebecca's eyes when I told her should have been my wake-up call, but I was so deep in the fog of manipulation by that point that I rationalized it away, telling myself that Marcus would calm down after the wedding, that this was just temporary stress, that our marriage would be different from our engagement. 3 months before the wedding date, Marcus suggested that I quit my job. He framed it as a romantic gesture, telling me that he made enough money for both of us, that I'd been working so hard for so many years and deserved a break, that we could use the time before the wedding for me to relax and focus on final preparations without the stress of work deadlines. He painted this picture of me as a future stay-at-home wife who could pursue hobbies and passions without the constraints of a 9-to-5 job, and honestly, part of me was tempted. I was tired. The wedding planning had consumed all my free time, and the idea of having days to myself sounded appealing in a way I hadn't expected. But something inside me, some instinct that hadn't been completely silenced yet, told me that quitting my job was a line I shouldn't cross. I loved my career, I'd worked hard to build my reputation in my field, and financial independence had always been important to me. So I told Marcus no, as gently as I could, explaining that my job was part of my identity, and I wasn't ready to give it up. The reaction I got was the first truly scary moment in our relationship, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. He didn't yell or throw things or become physically aggressive, but his face changed in a way I'd never seen before. His eyes went cold and distant, and he withdrew completely, giving me the silent treatment for 3 days straight, making me feel like I had committed some unforgivable betrayal by wanting to keep my own career. Eventually, he came back around, apologized for overreacting, told me he just wanted to take care of me and had been hurt by my rejection of his offer, and like the fool I was, I accepted his apology and tried to move forward. Have you ever felt like you're living 2 different realities at the same time, where part of you knows something is deeply wrong, but another part of you is desperately trying to maintain the illusion that everything is fine? That's exactly where I was in the weeks leading up to the wedding. On the surface, things seemed to be progressing normally. We had our venue booked, our invitations sent, our honeymoon planned to Bali, our apartment lease extended to accommodate both of us officially. But underneath all of that normalcy, there was a current of tension and unease that I couldn't shake, a feeling in my gut that told me something wasn't right, even though I couldn't point to any specific thing that was objectively wrong. Marcus had become increasingly controlling about my schedule, wanting to know where I was at all times, who I was with, when I'd be home. He'd check my phone when I was in the shower, he'd show up unannounced at my office claiming he wanted to take me to lunch, but really checking to see if I was where I said I'd be. He'd interrogate me about conversations I'd had with male colleagues or friends. When I tried to address these behaviors, tried to set boundaries, or express that his actions were making me feel suffocated and distrusted, he would turn it around on me, asking why I needed so much privacy if I had nothing to hide, suggesting that my defensiveness was actually proof that I was being inappropriate with other men, making me feel guilty for wanting basic respect and autonomy in our relationship. Then came the night that changed everything. The night that set in motion the events that would either destroy me completely or force me to find a strength I didn't know I possessed. It was a Wednesday evening, exactly 3 days before our Saturday wedding, and I had just gotten home from a final dress fitting. I was exhausted but excited, holding the garment bag with my beautiful dress inside, thinking about how in just 72 hours I'd be wearing it and walking down the aisle toward my future. Marcus was sitting on the couch in our living room, and the moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The energy in the room felt heavy, oppressive, like walking into a wall of tension that made my skin prickle with anxiety. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't ask about the fitting, didn't acknowledge my presence at all for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. When he finally raised his eyes to meet mine, there was something in his expression that I'd never seen before, something that made my heart start racing and my hands start trembling around the garment bag I was holding. He said my name, just my name, in a tone that was completely flat and emotionless, and then he said the words that would haunt me for months afterward. I've been thinking, and I've decided we need to cancel the wedding. Not postpone, not delay, not take more time to work through issues. Cancel. As in, it's over, it's done, we're not getting married. Not now, not ever. I stood there frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard, my brain trying to make sense of words that seemed impossible given the context of everything we'd built together, everything we'd planned, everything we'd invested emotionally and financially and socially into this wedding that was supposed to happen in 3 days. I remember the garment bag slipping from my hands and falling to the floor. I remember my mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. I remember the way the room seemed to tilt and spin like I was on a boat in rough seas. Finally, I managed to choke out a single word. Why? And that's when he started talking, laying out his reasoning in a calm, measured voice that made everything so much worse because of how rational he made it all sound. He told me that he'd realized over the past few weeks that I wasn't ready for marriage, that my resistance to quitting my job showed I wasn't fully committed to building a life with him, that my defensiveness about my phone and my schedule indicated I had something to hide, that my friendship with Rebecca and other people from my past was preventing me from fully embracing our future together. He said he loved me, that he wanted to be with me, but that he couldn't marry someone who wasn't willing to prioritize the relationship above everything else, and that he thought we needed to take a step back, cancel the wedding, and work on these issues before we could move forward with getting married. The thing is, nothing he was saying made any logical sense if you actually thought about it critically, because I had bent over backwards to accommodate him. I had sacrificed friendships and hobbies and personal boundaries to make him happy. I had centered my entire existence around our relationship for months. But in that moment, standing in our living room with my wedding dress on the floor and my dreams crumbling around me, I wasn't thinking critically. I was panicking, desperate, devastated, and scrambling to understand how we had gotten here and what I could do to fix it. I begged him to reconsider, tears streaming down my face, my voice breaking with every word. I asked what I could do differently, how I could prove my commitment, what he needed from me to feel secure enough to go through with the wedding. And here's where the trap really reveals itself, where his true intentions become crystal clear in hindsight. He told me that if I really loved him, if I really wanted to marry him, I would trust him to know what was best for both of us. I would accept his decision without argument. I would show him through my actions over the coming weeks and months that I was willing to change and grow and become the partner he needed me to be. He was asking me to prove myself, to earn back the privilege of marrying him, to essentially audition for the role of his wife after I'd already said yes to his proposal and planned an entire wedding. I spent that night curled up in our bed, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe, feeling like my entire world had been pulled out from underneath me without warning. Marcus slept on the couch, maintaining physical distance to give me space to process, but really to let the emotional devastation sink in deeper, to let me marinate in my desperation and fear and confusion. The next morning, Thursday, I had to start making phone calls. I had to call my parents and tell them the wedding was canceled, listening to my mother cry and my father demand to know what happened, not having any answers that made sense even to myself. I had to call the venue and the caterer and the photographer and the florist, canceling contracts and losing deposits and explaining a situation I didn't understand. I had to text our guests, 200 people who had made arrangements to attend our wedding in 2 days, telling them it wasn't happening anymore, dealing with their shock and confusion and questions I couldn't answer. And through all of this, Marcus was there, but not there, present in the apartment, but emotionally distant, watching me fall apart with what I now recognize as calculated detachment, letting me hit rock bottom so he could position himself as my only lifeline. By Friday, I was a shell of myself, functioning on autopilot, going through the motions of dismantling a wedding that had taken months to plan, fielding concerned calls from friends and family, trying to hold myself together when every cell in my body wanted to collapse. That evening, Marcus approached me with what he presented as an olive branch, a path forward. He said that seeing how devastated I was had made him realize how much I truly cared about him, that my willingness to respect his decision to cancel showed maturity and respect he hadn't been sure I possessed, that maybe we could work through this after all if I was willing to make some changes. He laid out conditions, requirements for us to stay together, and eventually reschedule the wedding. I would need to go to therapy to work on my commitment issues. I would need to be more transparent about my whereabouts and communications. I would need to distance myself from friends he felt were toxic influences. I would need to consider eventually transitioning out of my career to focus on our family. And here's the most insidious part. He framed all of this as being for my own good, for my healing, for my growth as a person. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor by giving me another chance. Like I should be grateful that he was willing to work with me despite my failures as a partner. And I was grateful. That's what breaks my heart the most when I look back on that version of myself. I was actually grateful that he was willing to stay with me after canceling our wedding 3 days before it was supposed to happen. I thanked him through my tears. I promised I would do whatever it took to prove myself to him. I agreed to all his conditions without question because I was so relieved that I wasn't losing him completely, that I still had a chance to salvage the relationship and eventually become his wife. I didn't see that I was walking directly into a trap designed to strip away every ounce of power and autonomy and self-worth I had left. I didn't see that the wedding cancellation wasn't the end goal. It was just the beginning of a plan to break me down so completely that I would become utterly dependent on him, that I would lose all sense of who I was outside of his definition of me, that I would accept whatever treatment he decided to give me because I'd been conditioned to believe I didn't deserve any better. I didn't see any of that because I was too busy drowning in my own desperation and fear and misplaced love for someone who had never actually loved me at all, someone who saw me as a project, a possession, something to mold and control, rather than a human being worthy of respect and genuine partnership. The weeks that followed the canceled wedding were the darkest period of my entire life, and I'm not being dramatic when I say that I genuinely wasn't sure I was going to survive them mentally or emotionally. I started therapy as Marcus had required, but I quickly realized that the therapist I was seeing, someone Marcus had recommended, was more interested in exploring what I was doing wrong in the relationship than helping me process the trauma of having my wedding canceled and my sense of self systematically dismantled. Every session felt like an interrogation about my behaviors, my choices, my inability to fully commit, and I would leave feeling worse about myself than when I arrived, which I now understand was exactly the point. Marcus monitored my progress, asking to see my therapy notes, wanting updates on what we'd discussed, positioning himself as a partner in my healing journey, when really he was just gathering more information about my vulnerabilities and insecurities to exploit later. I stopped seeing my friends almost entirely, partially because I was ashamed of what had happened and didn't want to face their questions and judgments, but mostly because every time I made plans to go out, Marcus would create some crisis or emergency that required my immediate attention, some reason why I needed to stay home with him instead, some way of making me feel guilty for wanting to spend time with anyone other than him. My job performance started to suffer because I was so emotionally exhausted and mentally drained that I couldn't focus on anything, couldn't meet deadlines, couldn't participate in meetings with the same enthusiasm and insight I'd previously brought to my work. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon and asked if everything was okay, and I remember sitting in her office trying to explain what was happening in my personal life without revealing just how bad things had gotten, trying to maintain some professional composure when inside I felt like I was dying a slow death. She was kind and understanding, offering me some time off if I needed it, suggesting I take advantage of our company's employee assistance program, but I declined everything because I knew that taking time off work would just give Marcus more control over my schedule, more opportunities to isolate me further, more space to tighten the grip he had on every aspect of my existence. Work was the only place I still felt like myself, even diminished as that self had become, and I clung to it like a drowning person clings to a piece of driftwood, knowing that if I let it go, I would have nothing left to keep me afloat. Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic and controlling as the weeks went on, and I found myself walking on eggshells constantly, never knowing what would set him off or trigger another lecture about my shortcomings as a partner. He went through my phone regularly, reading my texts and emails, questioning innocent conversations with coworkers and family members, finding sinister intentions in the most mundane exchanges. He criticized everything about me: my appearance, my intelligence, my social skills, my ability to manage household tasks, my sexual performance, always framing his criticism as constructive feedback from someone who loved me and wanted me to be my best self, but really just chipping away at my self-esteem piece by piece until I started to believe that I was fundamentally flawed and lucky that anyone would want to be with me at all, let alone someone like him who was supposedly patient enough to deal with all my issues. He controlled our finances even though we weren't married and kept our money separate, insisting I needed to run every purchase by him first, questioning why I needed new work clothes, or why I'd spent money on lunch with a colleague, making me justify every dollar I spent like I was a child asking for allowance rather than a grown woman with her own income. The sexual aspect of our relationship changed too, becoming less about mutual pleasure and connection, and more about his assertion of dominance and control. He would initiate at times when I was exhausted or upset or clearly not in the mood, and when I'd try to decline gently, he'd accuse me of being frigid or unattracted to him, or punishing him for the wedding cancellation, guilting me into compliance by making me feel like denying him sex was proof that I wasn't truly committed to working on our relationship. Afterward, I'd lie there feeling used and disgusted with myself, wondering how I'd gotten to a place where I didn't even have autonomy over my own body, where saying no to sex felt impossible because the emotional consequences were too severe to bear. I started to experience physical symptoms of the psychological abuse I was enduring: constant headaches, digestive issues, insomnia that left me exhausted during the day, anxiety that manifested as chest tightness and shortness of breath, panic attacks that would hit me without warning and leave me shaking and crying in bathroom stalls at work or in my car during lunch breaks. Have you ever reached a point where you're so lost in darkness that you can't even remember what light looks like, where you've been underground for so long that you forget the sun exists? That's where I was approximately 6 weeks after the wedding cancellation, and I genuinely believed that this was just how life was going to be from now on, that I'd made my choices, and now I had to live with the consequences, that leaving Marcus wasn't an option because I'd already lost so much in the process of trying to keep him that abandoning the relationship would mean all that loss was for nothing. But then something happened that started to crack the facade, that planted the first seed of awareness that would eventually grow into the determination to save myself from the trap I'd walked into so willingly. I was at the grocery store alone, one of the few times Marcus let me go anywhere by myself, and I ran into Rebecca, my former best friend who I'd pushed away months earlier during the wedding planning process. She looked at me with such concern and sadness that I almost started crying right there in the produce section, and before I could make an excuse and run away, she grabbed my arm gently and said, "I need you to know that whatever he's told you about yourself isn't true. You're not the problem here, and when you're ready to leave, I'll be here to help you." I didn't respond to Rebecca in that moment. Couldn't respond because acknowledging what she'd said would have meant admitting things I wasn't ready to admit, facing truths I'd been desperately avoiding. But her words stayed with me like a splinter under my skin, uncomfortable and persistent and impossible to ignore completely. That night, after Marcus had gone to sleep, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I Googled emotional abuse in relationships, and as I read through the articles and checklists and warning signs, I felt like I was reading a description of my own life with frightening accuracy. Isolation from friends and family, check. Constant criticism disguised as concern, check. Control over finances and schedule, check. Gaslighting and manipulation, check. Using the threat of abandonment to maintain compliance, check. Making the victim feel responsible for the abuser's behavior, check. Every single characteristic of an emotionally abusive relationship was present in my situation with Marcus, laid out in black and white on my phone screen at 2 a.m. while I sat on the bathroom floor trying not to hyperventilate, as the reality of what I'd been living through finally started to sink in. The next few days were strange because I was suddenly seeing everything through a different lens, noticing patterns I'd been blind to before, recognizing manipulation tactics that I'd previously accepted as normal relationship dynamics. When Marcus criticized my cooking and suggested I needed to take some classes to improve my skills, I heard it for what it was: a put-down designed to make me feel incompetent. When he asked to see my phone, just because he liked looking through our photos together, I recognized it as a monitoring tactic designed to invade my privacy. When he suggested we skip my family's Thanksgiving gathering because he didn't feel up to dealing with my overbearing parents, I understood it as another isolation strategy designed to cut me off from my support system. But here's the thing about realizing you're in an abusive relationship. You can't just immediately leave. You can't just flip a switch and walk away, especially when you've been systematically broken down to the point where you don't trust your own judgment and you're terrified of what will happen if you try to escape. So I started planning quietly, secretly, carefully, gathering resources and information and courage like pieces of armor I would need when the time came to fight back and save myself from the trap he'd set. I reached out to Rebecca through a messaging app Marcus didn't know I had, apologizing for pushing her away and asking if her offer to help was still on the table. She responded within minutes, telling me she'd been hoping I'd contact her, that she'd been so worried about me, that she was ready to support me in whatever way I needed. We started communicating regularly, always when Marcus was at work or in the shower or otherwise occupied, and she helped me see things clearly, validated my experiences, reminded me of who I'd been before Marcus had started reshaping me into someone I didn't recognize. She also shared something that made my blood run cold. She'd done some digging after our encounter at the grocery store, talking to people who knew Marcus before I met him, and she'd discovered that I wasn't his first victim. There had been another woman, Melissa, who he'd been engaged to about 4 years earlier, and according to mutual acquaintances, he'd done almost exactly the same thing to her, canceling their wedding at the last minute, and then spending months breaking her down psychologically before she'd finally escape the relationship and move to another state to start over. The pattern was clear, the trap was clear, and suddenly I understood that Marcus hadn't canceled our wedding because of anything I'd done or failed to do. He'd canceled it because that was his method of operation, his way of establishing complete control over his partners, his preferred technique for creating emotional dependence and vulnerability that he could then exploit. Armed with this knowledge and with Rebecca's support, I started taking concrete steps to prepare for my exit from the relationship. I opened a new bank account that Marcus didn't know about and started transferring small amounts of money from each paycheck, building an emergency fund that would allow me to get my own place when the time came to leave. I made copies of important documents, my passport, my birth certificate, my social security card, and stored them at Rebecca's apartment. I started documenting Marcus's behavior, keeping a journal where I recorded incidents of emotional abuse, taking screenshots of controlling text messages, saving voicemails where he berated me for imagined infractions. I reconnected with my therapist, the one I'd been seeing before Marcus had directed me to his recommended counselor, and started processing the trauma I'd been through and building the psychological strength I'd need to actually go through with leaving. And most importantly, I started rediscovering pieces of myself that I'd lost during the months of manipulation and control. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do, started expressing opinions that differed from Marcus's, started setting small boundaries and seeing how he reacted, testing the waters and building my confidence for the bigger boundaries I'd need to set when I was ready to leave completely. Marcus noticed the changes, of course, and his response was to escalate his controlling behaviors, becoming more demanding and more aggressive in his efforts to pull me back in line. He accused me of having an affair, of planning to leave him, of being ungrateful for all the work he'd put into helping me become a better person. He alternated between love bombing, showing up with flowers and gifts and apologies and promises to be better, and punishment tactics like the silent treatment, or withholding affection, or threatening to leave me if I didn't get my act together. But the thing is, now that I could see the patterns clearly, now that I understood what he was doing and why, his tactics lost their power over me. I stopped feeling guilty when he criticized me because I recognized it as manipulation rather than valid feedback. I stopped feeling afraid when he threatened to leave because I realized that losing him wasn't actually a loss at all. It was liberation. I stopped feeling responsible for his emotions because I understood that his reactions had nothing to do with my behavior and everything to do with his need for control. The day I finally left was approximately 3 months after the wedding cancellation, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I'd planned it carefully with Rebecca's help. I waited until Marcus left for a weekend business trip, and the moment his plane took off, I moved into action. Rebecca came over with her truck and her boyfriend, and we packed up all my belongings in a matter of hours, loading boxes and furniture and everything I cared about into that truck, while my heart pounded and my hands shook, and part of me still worried that somehow he'd know what I was doing and come back to stop me. I left a note on the kitchen counter, brief and to the point, telling him our relationship was over, I was leaving, and I didn't want any contact from him going forward. I left my key and the engagement ring he'd given me on top of that note, physical symbols of everything I was walking away from. And then I walked out of that apartment for the last time and didn't look back. I stayed with Rebecca for the first few weeks while I found my own place, a tiny studio apartment that was nothing fancy but was mine, all mine, a space where I made all the decisions and set all the rules and didn't have to justify my existence to anyone. Marcus tried everything to get me back, of course, because abusers don't let go easily when they lose control over their victims. He called and texted constantly until I blocked his number. He showed up at my workplace until I got a restraining order. He sent mutual friends to try to convince me to give him another chance, painting himself as the heartbroken lover whose fiancé had abandoned him without warning or reason. He created fake social media accounts to monitor my activities and send me messages about how much he missed me and how we could work things out if I'd just talk to him. He even contacted my parents, spinning some story about how I'd been acting erratically, and he was worried about my mental health, trying to weaponize their concern to get them to pressure me to reconcile with him. But I held firm, maintained no contact, refused to engage with any of his attempts to pull me back in, because I knew that even a single conversation would give him an opening to start the manipulation cycle all over again, to find new vulnerabilities to exploit, to set new traps for me to fall into. It was hard, so incredibly hard, to resist the urge to respond when he sent messages that played on my guilt, or my nostalgia, or my lingering feelings for the person I thought he was. But every time I felt myself weakening, I'd read through my journal of abusive incidents, or I'd call Rebecca, or I'd remind myself that the man I'd loved had never actually existed. He'd been a carefully constructed facade designed to lure me in before revealing the monster underneath. The healing process has been long and messy and nonlinear, filled with setbacks and breakthroughs and days where I felt strong, and days where I felt like I'd made no progress at all. I spent months in intensive therapy working through the trauma of emotional abuse, learning to recognize red flags in potential partners, rebuilding my self-esteem and my sense of identity separate from anyone else's definition of who I should be. I had to relearn how to trust my own judgment, to believe that my thoughts and feelings and perceptions were valid rather than constantly second-guessing myself the way I'd been conditioned to do during my time with Marcus. I had to grieve not just the relationship itself, but the version of my life I'd imagined having, the future I'd planned that included marriage and partnership and all the milestones I'd been looking forward to. I had to forgive myself for not seeing the warning signs sooner, for staying as long as I did, for allowing someone to treat me so poorly, even though I knew on some level that what was happening wasn't right. That self-forgiveness piece has honestly been the hardest part because it's easy to look back and judge your past self harshly for decisions that seem obviously wrong in hindsight, but I've had to learn to extend compassion to the woman I was during that relationship, to understand that she was doing the best she could with the information and resources she had at the time, that she survived something genuinely traumatic and came out the other side, and that deserves acknowledgement rather than condemnation. I also had to rebuild all the relationships I'd damaged or neglected during my time with Marcus, reaching out to friends I'd pushed away and family members I'd kept at arm's length, explaining what had happened and asking for forgiveness for my absence and my lies and my compliance with his isolation tactics. Most people were understanding and welcoming, grateful that I'd gotten out and eager to support my recovery, but there were some relationships that couldn't be salvaged, some friendships that had been too damaged by my choices to put back together, and I've had to make peace with that loss as well. Rebecca, of course, has been my rock throughout this entire process, never once saying "I told you so" or making me feel stupid for not listening to her concerns earlier, just being present and supportive and understanding in ways I didn't know friendship could be. She saved my life, truly, by refusing to give up on me even when I'd pushed her away, by planting that seed of awareness in the grocery store that day, by providing practical help and emotional support when I was ready to leave, and I will be forever grateful for her persistence and her love. It's been 2 years now since I left Marcus, 2 years since I saved myself from the trap he'd set, and my life looks completely different in the best possible ways. I got a promotion at work, I've traveled to places I'd always wanted to visit, I've developed new hobbies and interests that are purely mine rather than compromises or concessions to someone else's preferences. I've dated casually without rushing into anything serious because I'm learning to be content with my own company and to understand that being single is infinitely better than being in a relationship that diminishes you. I still have hard days where the trauma resurfaces unexpectedly, where something will trigger memories of those dark months and I'll find myself spiraling into anxiety or self-doubt. But I've learned coping strategies and I have a support system, and I know that those hard days pass and don't define my overall trajectory. I've also become an advocate for others experiencing emotional abuse, volunteering with a local organization that helps people escape controlling relationships, sharing my story when it might help someone else recognize their own situation and find the courage to leave, turning my painful experience into something that might prevent or alleviate someone else's pain. Looking back on everything that happened, I can see now that the wedding cancellation, as devastating as it was in the moment, was actually the catalyst that eventually saved me from something much worse. If Marcus had gone through with the wedding, if we'd actually gotten married, it would have been exponentially harder to leave because the legal and financial and social entanglements would have been that much more complex. The trap would have been that much tighter, the escape that much more difficult. In a twisted way, his decision to cancel the wedding while still maintaining the relationship was both his biggest power play and his biggest mistake, because it gave me a glimpse of his true nature before I was legally bound to him, before I had children with him, before I'd sacrificed even more of myself on the altar of his ego and control needs. He thought he was being clever, thought he was executing a perfect plan to break me down and build me back up as his ideal submissive partner. But what he actually did was show me exactly who he was and what he was capable of, giving me the information I needed to eventually recognize the trap and fight my way out of it. The lessons I've learned from this experience are ones I carry with me every single day, and I want to share them with anyone who might be going through something similar or who might recognize elements of their own relationship in my story. First, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, if someone's behavior toward you makes you uncomfortable or anxious or diminished, that feeling is valid and worth paying attention to, even if you can't immediately articulate why or if the other person is telling you you're overreacting. Second, isolation is one of the biggest red flags in any relationship. If your partner is systematically cutting you off from friends, family, career, hobbies, anything that exists independent of your relationship with them, that's not love and it's not protection. It's control and it's dangerous. Third, you should never have to earn or prove your worth to someone who claims to love you. Real love is given freely and unconditionally, not dangled as a reward for good behavior or withheld as punishment for failing to meet arbitrary standards. Fourth, independence is not incompatible with partnership. A healthy relationship enhances your life without requiring you to give up essential parts of yourself like career, friendships, autonomy, identity. And fifth, if you're in an abusive situation, it's never too late to leave. I know it feels impossible. I know you're scared and exhausted and convinced that you can't survive on your own, but you can. You absolutely can. And there are people and resources ready to help you when you're ready to take that step. I share my story not for sympathy or attention, but because I know there are countless people out there who are living variations of what I lived through, who are trapped in relationships with partners who use love as a weapon and manipulation as a control mechanism, who have been broken down so thoroughly that they don't even recognize themselves anymore. If that's you, if any part of my story resonates with your current reality, please know that you deserve better, that the problem isn't you no matter what your partner has convinced you to believe, and that escape is possible even when it doesn't feel that way. Reach out to someone you trust. Call a domestic violence hotline. Make a safety plan. Take it one day at a time, but please don't stay in a situation that is destroying your spirit and your sense of self. The wedding Marcus canceled was supposed to be the beginning of my life with him, but instead, the cancellation became the beginning of my journey back to myself, back to the strong, capable, worthy woman I'd been before he started tearing me down. And I emerged from that trap not just surviving but thriving, not just broken but rebuilt stronger than before. So here's my call to action for all of you watching this video on I Live to Tell. I want you to comment below and share your thoughts, your experiences, your own stories if you feel comfortable doing so. Have you ever been in a relationship where someone used manipulation and control disguised as love? Have you witnessed someone you care about going through something similar? How did you find the strength to leave or help someone else leave? Creating a community where we can talk openly about these experiences is so important because isolation is one of the abuser's most powerful tools, and breaking that isolation through shared stories and mutual support is how we fight back collectively. I also want you to understand the importance of recognizing the warning signs of emotional abuse early, before you're in so deep that escape feels impossible. So please educate yourself, have conversations with your friends and family about healthy versus unhealthy relationship dynamics. And never assume it couldn't happen to you because it absolutely can happen to anyone regardless of intelligence, education, socioeconomic status, or any other factor you might think would protect you. If this story touched your heart, if it resonated with you in any way, if you found value in hearing about my experience and my survival, please leave a like on this video because it helps spread this message to others who might need to hear it. Subscribe to I Live to Tell for more stories of survival and resilience and people who overcame incredible odds to reclaim their lives and their power. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a video where someone shares their truth and their triumph. And most importantly, If you or someone you know is currently in an emotionally abusive or controlling relationship, please reach out for help. There are resources available. There are people who understand what you're going through, and there is absolutely hope for a better life beyond the trap you're currently caught in. You are not alone, you are not crazy, you are not the problem, and you deserve a life filled with genuine love, respect, mutual support, and authentic partnership. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of a community that believes survivors and supports people on their healing journeys. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and remember that sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up being the catalysts for becoming the best versions of ourselves.